Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mastercrafted. This week, we are going to be talking with Frankie, the one who won our GT up here in Laramie, and we are going to be talking all things Legion of Excess. Phil, what are some things that we're going to be going over today?
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about boogeyman is the incorrect term, right? We've talked about it in the past in terms of competitive 40K. There were those lists, there were those armies that were just out there to get you, and they were so powerful and so strong that everyone had to plan and had to build around these specific armies because they were so incredibly tough and so incredibly tooled out to deal with everything that you had to be cognizant of what they were doing. And people have definitely felt that way about Legions of Excess. But I think between the three individuals that are on this call, we can kind of explain why, yes, they are a great army. Yes, they have a lot of tools, but there are plenty of things that you can do as a player to find solutions around it. So we've brought on Frank. My my only loss at the GT up in Wyoming. It was a great game, and it was Legions of Excess versus Final Day. If you want to know what exactly happened in this game, we have a breakdown, Lane and I, when we recap the GT, and we have a pretty sizable breakdown of kind of what went on during that game and the things that I could have done better and the things that happened during that game. And Frank's going to give his side of the story in terms of like how that game worked out and what Legions of Excess do. But really, we want everyone to understand that there are so many tools and so many things that you can do. Do not get overwhelmed with Legions of Excess, but you need to be cognizant of them because they are a good army and they do have a lot of tools. Frank is a great player up in Denver 40K Fight Club, but plays for MHM. He is a consistent guy that we see in the circuit often. We really appreciate you having on, Frank. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background about yourself, competitive 40K, and Legions of Excess?
Sure. I got started in 40K when I was a little whippersnapper. Man, 32 years ago, probably. So first edition and, the original Rogue Trader and second edition, I used to play with my brother. We would, we didn't have money to play 40K. So I played Tyranids with World Eaters. Well, I guess they were just Chaos Marines back then. And just mixed them together and played. Had the homemade limousine for my Gene Stealers and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And then I took a long break when I went to school and got back into it in 8th edition and have been pretty consistent since then. So play a lot of GTs, a lot of RTTs, and with Fight Club every week. So.
Man, that is, you have more years of playing, 40K than I have alive. So, you definitely got some experience playing the game.
Yep.
And that is awesome, coming back into 8th. I think the game, as we've talked about many times, is just in so much better of a spot and stuff, but it just hopefully continues to do so. One of the things that is so crazy is all these Grotmist detachments just getting dropped on the meta, as well as 2 new books. And, people are still kind of feeling it out, seeing where things are. And you picked up in December Legions of Excess. Do you want to kind of tell people, all about it and what comes with it?
Sure. I mean, I'd been building them for a while, and been looking for an excuse to get into them. And I think Tyranids are very good right now. They're my main. I've got 10,000 points of them behind me right here. I think they're good. They're just a little boring to play right now, it feels like for me. You just kind of can't get across the board. Don't kill a lot of stuff. And then when I saw that Grotmist detachment, I was like, oh, it's a perfect excuse. I'm gonna get my Slaanesh table ready and get into it. And it plays a lot like Kraken played in 9th edition, where it's super fast, super deadly, good AP, I don't know. It's what I want Tyranids to be right now. So, but it's not. So, or Tyranids are not. So.
I mean, it definitely makes sense. You have big giant keepers, you have little gribblies running around, you can ablate wounds everywhere, and you're just moving around and kind of have a lot of tools and tricks, right? That I'm sure Tyranids, if you had that for Tyranids where you could like ablate wounds off the big bugs to the little bugs to the big bugs, or like you could terrify them into not shooting you. Those sound like some great tools that Tyranids would definitely enjoy having. So I get it, makes sense.
And I think the battle shock mechanic for Slaanesh is actually a lot more useful most of the time than it is for Tyranids, with the exception obviously of Shadows in the Warp. Your turn when you use that, it can be game changing, but Slaanesh has like a consistent access to constant battle shock tests when you need them. Sexy Dance Don't Shoot Me is, a lot of people talk about Thieves of Pain as being the strat. I think I used it once in our game. It's good, but the Dance at You Don't Shoot Me is unbelievably good into most shooting armies, especially anything leadership 7. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
in my shadow too, it's -2. It's just brutal.
Well, the nice part about it is, right, I think it's not even just the fact that you could turn off shooting, but even if they pass, it's still -1. That
Oh yeah,
alone
and a
makes
lot of
that
the stuff you're shooting at, if you're shooting at a keeper, they already have the built-in -1. Let's say you've got a +1 from your detachment, for example. A lot of times it'll be at -2, and it just cancels out your entire army rule, which is pretty rough.
Yeah, for sure. You have to find ways around it, right? And that's the great part about 40K. It's a puzzle. Like you're not going to have every perfect tool and every perfect matchup. You're going to have to find solutions to win the game. And there are games where, like, we'll talk about it in a minute, because you played my Death Guard opponent round 4 and round 3, and your game into Death Guard was a lot different than my game into Death Guard. And that's just because, in terms of tools, right? You have different tools than I have, and I could deal with Death Guard differently than you could deal with Death Guard. So why don't you start? Give us a little run through of each of your matchups leading up into the GT.
Sure. First round, I drew Ben, the Custodes player, and I was like, cool. We're gonna start this tournament with a loss. Stuff like Custodes is great melee, great shooting. They're already hitting on 2s, so my -1, hitting on 3s is a lot worse than hitting on 2s, but hitting on 3s is still good. So I can kill them if I can get into them, but I can't gambit all the time, like when I want to. I think into Custodes in general, I mean, he was running the Dread Spam list, and the Telemons, they're deadly, but it's only 5 attacks. They can't kill a keeper. They literally, if everything goes right for them and everything goes wrong for me, they can't kill a keeper if I gambit into it. So I was still able to gambit most of the time, even with the fiends, maybe lose 2 or 3 to a Telemon, and then the -1 damage makes it so the fiends can't necessarily one-shot them back, but kind of tie them up and get a keeper in there as well, and can kill them for sure. I avoided the tanks for the most part. Those things are very deadly, but the -1 really helped a lot there as well. I think he's most of the time getting 1 or 2 shots through, and then I've got my Feel No Pain, and it was a tough game. I honestly feel like if I had gone first, I probably would have lost, but I went second and won by 20 points, and just that big final turn scoring was big in that game.
For sure.
That is very tough, I feel like, as well. I mean, those dreads are just hard to chew through, even for somebody who has as much punch as Legions of Excess. They are beefy for sure. And real quick, while we're kind of still going through this, let's get a quick rundown through your list and
sure.
so what everybody knows you brought.
Yeah, I am really sort of the mindset that right now in 40K, even for singles, like I like to lean pretty skewy. Like I think so much goes into doing well at the game that is beyond just skill, right? Like I'm a decent player. I'm a good player. But like if I ran into one of the 4 orcs that were playing there, I probably don't win the tournament, right? Like that matchup is very hard. So I'm skewing heavily into anti-gun line. So fast, deadly, hard to kill, 3 keepers, 18 fiends. That's the meat and bones of the list. Real pain to deal with. Then I've got 1 unit of demonettes, which usually will go grab an objective. 1 unit of plague bearers that stays on my home objective. The mask, just because the mask is incredibly good and incredibly useful for both for scoring and her buff. What else do I have on that list? Oh, 2 units of seekers, which I can't live without them. I would not build a list without at least 2 units of Seekers. They give you the ability to score turn 1 really easily because they're so fast. They give you the ability to clean up screens like incredibly easily, and you need to do that to get your big stuff through. It's good to have 25 attacks that pick up almost any trash, and into something like gargoyles, like you can gambit and guarantee that you're going to kill the whole unit. I think that's a whole list.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about before. So yeah, I think that was the 11 units, and that's
11.
I mean, 6 real just beat sticks when you talk about the fiends and the 3 keepers. I mean, if they get into anything and they're able to do their gambit, they are going to chunk some wounds for sure.
Yeah, -1 damage is a problem for the fiends, but it's still a lot of output.
Okay. I saw it firsthand. We saw the Custodes, that matchup. What was your round 2?
Round 2 is Knights. Andy, I think his name is. Great player, actually. And, for as good as my dice were in that game, He handled it pretty well. He really struggled into the keepers. I was just making every single save. It was pretty rough. My feel no pains were on fire too. The big moment from that game was turn one. He went first and pushed pretty aggressively on the side with a couple of baby knights and Canis. And at the bottom of the turn, I charged one of the baby knights with some fiends. He heroicked with Canis, which allowed me to charge into Canis with a keeper. And we talked about it before. The math is right around 50% that Canis can one-shot a keeper. I think he probably should have swung into the fiends, and that could have really changed the game. But he swung into the keeper, and the math is right around 6 wounds left with the saves and the feel no pains. And that's how it ended up. The keeper was on 6 wounds. The fiend swung back into Canis, and then the keeper swung into Canis and blew him up turn one, and that was pretty much game immediately. To his credit, he hung in there and fought hard, and by the end of the game, I think honestly if it had gone to 6 turns, I probably would have ended up losing. He really put up a good fight after that, but it was an uphill battle for him. I felt for him, especially since, I mean, there was a couple moments when he shot everything at the keepers and just couldn't get through them, which is rough. The -1 to hit's a big deal into knights for sure.
For sure. Exactly. When they don't have access to as many rerolls or lethals that the majority of armies can, if you don't have that, it definitely struggles.
Out of curiosity, did you on your next turn then, try to battle shock your own units and heal that keeper back up from 6 to an ungodly number of wounds?
She went from 6 to 12 in my command phase.
Just full 2d3, you got the max. Of course you did, Frankie. Of course.
The dice were, honestly, it's like I was saying before, I feel like so many things go into doing well. Like playing well is very important, but the dice did not betray me in that game. They were definitely on my side. They didn't betray me in any game really. I had decent dice at least every game. Never had a game of bad dice, so it's very helpful.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, going into the final round of day one, what was your last game like?
What was my last game? Was that my Death Guard game? Do you guys have it up?
It was your Death Guard game because I played them.
Yeah. Yep.
Round 4.
Yeah, it was Death Guard. Yep. Man, when I saw that I drew Death Guard, I was not stoked because they do so many things that make it hard for me. Great melee, obviously, so you don't want to gambit like into Death Shroud Terminators because they will just pick up a unit of fiends, or at least the majority of it, and make them combat ineffective. -1 ballistic skill or a weapon skill when you can't gambit is very bad for things like fiends. So I was very nervous going into that game. I think the only mistake he made was he was just not quite aggressive enough. If he had been a little more aggressive, I think he wins that matchup. I only ended up winning by 6 or 7. It was a brutal one. And his list is built for castling, which is helpful for me too, because I have the speed that even if I can't kill stuff, I can get on objectives. I don't want to trade because I have 11 units, and even Death Guard, I don't remember how many units he had, but it was certainly more than 11, even with Morty. But I can't trade. But the speed was incredibly helpful in that game just for scoring and things like that. Yeah, you can't just you can't plow some fiends into some Death Shroud Terminators because they live through it without the rerolls, and then they just kill you right back. It was a great game. He played really well. It was tough.
Yeah, I do think that is one of those hard things. Is not a lot of people feel like they should be really running towards Legions of Excess if they don't have to. But Death Guard, you take that space, you make them deal with you, and that is a very good point. Out of curiosity, you're talking about trying to go into like Death Shroud Terminators. At any point, were you using your ablative wounds, like charged fiends in, and then passed off those wounds to something else so that you could go ahead and...
There were a couple times in that game for sure. I think that he was running 3-man Death Shrouds, so
he
doesn't have the volume to kill keepers. So I'd run in with fiends, gambit, pass the damage to a keeper, which sucks because he's wounding the fiends a lot easier than he's wounding the keepers, but they have 18 wounds, they've got the 5-up feel no pain, so they're tougher to bring down, and the -1 still goes into the Death Shrouds, although he had 1 unit with Typhus, and then 1 unit with Lord of Contagion, so they're re-rolling all hits, so the -1 doesn't really help that much.
And Mortarion ignoring modifiers is in that aura, like It's so good.
It destroys that, we're talking about the "don't shoot me, I'm sexy" and how good it is. It does nothing to Death Guard. Period. Like it doesn't do anything. It doesn't give them the -1 to hit. They don't battle shock because they're ignoring the leadership modifier too. So you spend a CP. If they don't, whatever 6 is, it's what 30% to fail that. Yeah. If so, if they don't fail that, which they're probably not going to, you just spent a CP and it did nothing, which is fun. Yeah, it was a great game. He played really well too. Is good player. It really probably came down to a couple dice rolls, one dice roll, one decision. Like that was it.
Yeah. Hell of a game. So you got through day one. We went and had some burgers and
Yes, we
wings
did.
and beers. Had a great time. I shot the shit, and then we went into day 2. Who was your first round of the day?
Well, it was either going to be Phil here or Andre. I definitely preferred to play Andre in that matchup. We've played a bunch of times. I just feel bad almost for guard players into that matchup. I think it's a bad matchup. I know you think you can beat me, Lane, but we'll figure it out.
Hey, I'm
Figure it out.
undefeated against Legion of Excess so far. So I think
I'm
people,
undefeated
it's
against
also a
everyone
detachment
so
difference.
far. I'm undefeated against guards, so we'll have to try it out. But I played him before. He changed his list quite a bit since the last time we played and added some Bulgrins in, which obviously that's a little scary for things like Fiends. Man, that strat, like "don't shoot me, I'm sexy" strat, just probably on its own won that game. I didn't have a lot of tough decisions to make or anything. It's just run into them. They can't kill you if you run into them. So, the 6-inch deep strike can be problematic, but like the -1 to hit on the keepers just removes the punch of that Scions dropping in. So they drop in, they shoot at a keeper. The keeper dances at him. I think he probably failed every single test because there were a couple times when it was 9s. There were a couple times when it was 8s. It's not great for them.
Yeah.
Which sort of leads into, we were talking about strategy. You need to make sure that you can have multiple units see keepers in this detachment or see whatever you want to shoot at in this detachment. You need to make sure your units can see multiple units, which I try to avoid as much as possible. With 11 units, it's not always super hard to do, but yeah, that's something that you just have to do. I think that reminds me, and I talked with Andre about this after the game. He made one critical mistake early on. I just was pushing Fiends up the left side of the board. He ended up having to drop his Scions into his deployment zone, the ones that he picked up and came back down turn 1, and they shot at those Fiends. The Fiends did the sexy dance. They battle shocked, couldn't shoot, couldn't pick them back up because they're battle shocked, and they died. I think turn 3, I ran through his home objective, killed mortars, killed everything. It was rough. And my plate guard actually got to kill a unit that turn too. It was fun. Doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, that is very nice. I do think, I looked at playing Bridgehead myself, and I do think fast melee who can, sure, Bridgehead drops in to go shoot something, but if you can just be there and eat them, it's easy peasy. And then you throw on dropping in and not being able to do anything on top of that, and it is brutal for a matchup.
Well, the speed makes it, it sort of takes away what Bridgehead wants to do, right? Like, if I'm in your deployment zone, you're ending up having to drop your deadly units down over there instead of in my deployment zone, which makes my life a lot easier. Like, you have to do something about me eating your CP farm and your mortars and your important stuff that's in your deployment zone. Like, I'm going to be there as fast as I can against that detachment because I don't want you dropping in my zone.
That is very fair, I guess. Well, all right, let's get to the last round of the GP. Let's hear your side of the story. We already got to hear Phil's, so lay it on us.
If any of you out there watched the other video, Phil was, I think, right on with his analysis of the game. There were a couple of really key moments early, I think. The initial one is he put some gargoyles on the line to start off, but he did bracket them with Death Leaper on one side and his Fights First unit of Acolytes on the other side.
Metamorphs.
Oh, Metamorphs. Yeah, sorry. I don't really know the army that well, honestly.
It's all good.
So I sent a unit up. It is Purge, so I wanted to make sure I killed a unit. I sent a unit of Seekers up that side, and then I had area denial, so I sent some Seekers towards the middle. I kind of messed up my movement, so I needed a pretty good charge to avoid the Metamorphs heroicing into me. I should have moved further up the right, and I realized that after I was already there, I was like, oh, I need like a 7 now instead of a 5 to make sure I don't get annihilated by these guys, and I think I rolled an 8. So they ran into the gargoyles, killed the gargoyles. Oh, sorry, Death Leaper heroiced into them, and the one time I used Thieves of Pain, I pushed it onto the middle unit because I knew I only needed 1 to live to get area denial. The odds of the Death Leaper killing 5 of them is very, very low. So I think he killed 2 or 3. And then they killed the gargoyles. So I got purged. I lost both those units the next turn. It was fine. I didn't care. They did what they needed to do. And then the other key moment that happened early was the next turn, a keeper was moving up that side, and it shot Death Leaper. I got pretty lucky on the roll and shot him down to 2 wounds, so I knew that I could skank shock him afterwards. So charged a Goliath and the Death Leaper together on that side, skank shocked the Death Leaper, killed the Goliath, and then so there was no +1 to wound. I know if I kill a Tyrannid's character, he can make it +1 to wound on the keeper. So I think he ended up getting the keeper down to 4 wounds instead of killing it the next turn, which sucks because they heal up and whatever.
Absolutely.
But yeah. So I think they were very early moments, and they were very key just as far as scoring goes, because it ended up being a little bit of a cagey game after that. I pushed eventually, but we both pushed eventually, but we waited till like turn 3 or even maybe 4 till we really, really engaged hard. And that, I mean, it's another one of those games that really could have gone either way. One slight decision different, one dice roll a little bit different, and things change a lot.
Well, we talked at length when Lane and I were recapping this, how critical Purge the Foe is and like how impactful that mission is, especially on armies that aren't like you have to come in with a plan, and the trading aspect of Purge the Foe is so much more impactful. And I would say almost any other mission. And it is a mission that a lot of people don't like, and I understand why, because going second means that you know the number every round, and it's not just a benefit at turn 5, it's a benefit every round. But believe it or not, I went second in that, and because of how the low model count that Frank is running and the high model count I'm running, I'm constantly chasing that number of kill units, so I have to play KG. So I was hoping the game would go longer, but there was a few turns where even though I could get like he killed 4 or 5 units, but Frank didn't put 4 or 5 units out in return for me to get after. So it is very interesting. It's an interesting matchup. You have to be prepared for it if you're going to run these higher model count armies, because it is one of those things where you have to have a plan.
And you did say, I mean, Purge is definitely better going second. There's no question for most armies, most matchups. But at the same time, the thing that I think people don't think about is that it's not one of those missions where you're going to score a shitload at the end either, right? Like it's not like one of those ones that has like okay, maybe you get 8 extra points because you went second. You're not getting 15 or 20 extra points like you are in some missions. You're getting 8 at the most extra, like by going second. So it doesn't have that big swing going second at the end of turn 5, which I think is a big deal as well.
For sure, absolutely.
I was worried you were going to hold more that entire game, and I was going to kill more maybe that entire game, and it just didn't really work out that way. It worked out. The game ended up a lot differently than I was expecting, for sure.
So just as like a theory question, I'm really curious as just maybe a potential line of play. Let's say if Phil had just jammed 4 units on the midpoint and gone, I am going to hold more guaranteed unless your army runs the fuck out here for me to shoot, would that have scared you more potentially? I'm curious.
Man, the 3 damage guys and stuff, I don't know, dude. I think that kind of pressure can definitely cause problems for me sometimes. The problem is that fiends into like acolytes and metamorphs and stuff, they can pick up 2 or 3 one unit of fiends can pick up 2 units like pretty easily. It's not, you don't even need the rerolls. Like let's say that I have my keeper with +1 to wound nearby. They're wounding on 2s, like without any rerolls. They're still going to pick up 20 guys. Like they could pick up 20 guys pretty easily. Like I think the math is probably 15, but they could pick up 20. So especially if I skank shock on my way in, like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That would have scared me, I think, if there were 40
Yeah.
little dudes on the middle objective.
I mean, and obviously too, they're not just jam packed. If set a line out hard in front and then just leave a ball behind them for at point one away,
Yeah.
you
I think
know.
it's another game where that the built-in -1 to hit was clutch, like very helpful. He's set up to make sure that he's hitting on twos with a lot of stuff a lot of the time, and he's hitting on threes most of the game. Sometimes fours. There were a couple times when it was fours because I've got the stacked -1s, and the final day isn't a ballistic skill, weapon skill modifier. It's +1 to hit. So if I've got -2 to hit on something, it's all the way back down to fours, which makes a big difference.
It's an interesting matchup. I've played it now probably like 10 times, and then that was a more different list because I've seen like the what is it, the epitome with the demonettes, and then using that as that kind of like anchor to constantly divert wounds back to. I've seen the triple keepers, the two keepers, and Shalaxi and all that stuff. But that's the first time I've seen triple fiends in terms of 3 6-man bricks, and I do think that provides
I love
something
it.
different. Yeah. Well, it's just like
It's
one, they're
lovely.
beat. Like the fact
Yeah,
that they can go through walls, I think is
yeah.
actually the part that makes them the scariest. Because everything else I'm perfectly okay with. It's them going through walls with the amount of movement they have makes that threat bubble so much further. It's tough. It's tough to screen out properly for.
They also have, and this is so maybe don't necessarily take my advice here, but they have a gargantuan footprint as well with those big oval bases. So my unit that was all the way on the left, all it did that entire game was protect my objective on the left that my demonettes were. I don't think they ever left. They just
They did not.
screened the back of the board. Yeah, they screened the back of the board, like almost half of the board, just that one unit, and made sure that you couldn't take that objective on that side as well. 210-point unit just there the whole game, but
I mean, it gave you probably almost a 30-inch bubble though strung
oh yeah,
out. You
yeah,
know?
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
All right. I appreciate the recap, Frank. That was a great game. I can't wait to run it back. I'm sure we're gonna see each other again at RMO here in a couple weeks. So, and I'm sure you will not be the only Slaanesh player there, Legions of Excess. So we've talked about it a little at length. We do talk about the meta often. If you were to play Legions of Excess, right, at RMO, which is going to be over 100 players, we're talking about players from all over the country and some of the top ranked players in their faction or overall. What do you not want to see? What does Slaanesh Demons like want to avoid at all costs?
Orcs, probably world eaters, anything that hits very hard. Now that I've played Death Guard with them, probably Death Guard. Anything that is gonna survive, at least for my list, survive fiends without if I don't reroll, if I don't gambit. Something that's gonna survive that and hit me back and kill half, three-quarters of the unit. That gambit is so important to like the reliability of most of my units. Like the keepers, I don't really worry about their damage output that much. They're just a giant thorn in people's sides. Yeah, I don't want to play, or I honestly feel like I haven't played them with this yet, but I feel like Vanguard Ultramarines might be a problem too. If I can't get into them, they're bouncing around. You charge them, they have a reactive move. They're bouncing all over the board. I feel like Centurions could pick up a keeper and a unit of fiends, which is kind of bonkers, but I don't know if it quite does that. I haven't
If
actually
they
looked at
pass
the
their
map.
battle shock,
If
that
they
is.
pass the battle block, which they are likely to.
Yeah,
That's
because
I
they're
mean,
going to keep them
you
at
got
pretty deep angles.
Gilliman running around with a leadership buff. I think if you're running Ultramarines, I would take that. I would take that as one of his two buffs almost every turn into Slaanesh for sure. Um, yeah, they'll be even with the -1, they're on sixes, right? They're gonna pass most of the time.
Yeah. And they're going to be so deep that you're not really going to be able to get into them, right? Because those company of heroes, and then they're going to have the Vect bubbles to increase all your CP cost. I don't know many armies that want to see Vanguard Ultramarines. Not because they're exceptionally like they're not your normal. Oh, I'm really scared of this. They're not Death Watch. They're not Ironstorm Ultramarines. They're not Legions of Excess. Right? They're not these super scary armies that you think of. But unfortunately, we have a few good individuals in our community. Ben Neal, Brandon Roddy, who happen to be very, very good with Vanguard Ultramarines, and they teach us lessons every time we play into them of just like, hey, this is the way this army plays, and I'm gonna beat you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I think that the Vanguard Ultramarines are, very sadly, the main reason that I hung up my Tyranids for a while. That matchup is just horrendous. I mean, like in Inceptors with, plasma or bolters, either way, the plasma Inceptors wounding my T-Fexes on 4s, re-rolling everything is just cool. Yeah, this is a fun game. You just picked up all of my monsters with these little guys who pop in 6 inches away, probably 18 inches away if you know how to play, but yeah, not fun. Not a fun matchup. And I don't think it is for Slaanesh either, so I guess we'll just have to see. I'm sure I'll run into it at some point.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how you do with RMO coming up. I think Legion's in a great spot. Obviously, you have your shit figured out and feel confident running it. So that's awesome. Any final changes you think you might be making to your list, modifying around things you're looking at?
Yeah, if I can find a good model or good proxy, I think I want to bring a Torment Bringer. I know a lot of people have been bringing that with Slaanesh, and I was like, I'm just gonna lean hard into the like crush you with fast stuff. But it can mitigate some of that problem with orcs and world eaters because I can charge fiends into, Exalted 8-bound or something and Gambit if I'm within 6 inches of the Torment Bringer, and I'll still have a fight on death. That's a 4-up, and I'll have sustained. So if it's like orcs or something, if it's like a 10-man unit of boys and I don't Gambit, I get sustained hits there, which gives me a better chance of picking up the unit in one swing without Gambits. But the fight on death, I think, is the big part there. The 6-inch away fight on death. Because then, like, I lost 2 guys or 3 guys on the, when I Gambited, and 1 or 2 of them get to swing still, which is a big deal. So that's probably what I'm going to change. I don't like the Contorted Epitome tech. I was running that for a while. It's still only 10 wounds, right, on the Demonettes.
Yeah.
It can be helpful, but I just can't stomach a 180-point unit of Demonettes. It just hurts me. But yeah, I think, that's RMO I'm looking forward to. Rod, I don't know, the whole community is just kind of, I think we're super lucky. It's really amazing. Ever since I joined Fight Club, just the amount of games and competitive games that you can get whenever you want is pretty awesome. So
Yeah, for sure. One last question for you though is you are playing you have hardly any shooting, right? With the keepers, that's all you have. What would be some tips for players who are learning how to play, more of that elite style fast melee? Because with 11 units, you don't really have extra pieces to trade. And like, what are some things to just, maybe some things you look for on whether or not, you go or you don't, and what's worth it?
I think my buddy Randall, who's an MHM also, you guys know him, he says that playing Tyranids for as long as I have has like given me the tools to play Slaanesh well, and I think he's right. You have to be cagey. You have to be careful. Like besides the keepers, pretty much everything can die pretty easily. Fiends they're only T5, 4 wounds. Sure, they have 5-up invuln, so it's not, you can cut through that with a lot of stuff. I think you just have to staging is super important, and you have to wait for your moments. Like a lot of times someone will put 4 units on the middle objective and I'm like, great, like what am I going to do about this? Like I can't sacrifice a unit of fiends right now. I think the decisions around that are based on matchup and based on the mission a lot of times. Like the last time you and I played would have been that's a perfect game and map for Slaanesh, right? We played, what is it called? You blow up the objective.
Scorched Earth, and we were on layout 1, so the nice big L's in the middle, and we just stared at each other and probably had the fastest game in the entire team's event. It was
because
like
you hold your home objective and one objective. That's perfect for an elite army. I don't care if you hold all the other objectives. You're not scoring more than me. And then turn 4 or 5, I can just be like, run everything out, kill stuff, try and burn your home objective if I can get there. I think that I see a lot of people play Slaanesh super aggressive, and I get that. Like, there's time and a place, right, when you're just going to run somebody over with it. But I think a lot of times against good players, you can't do that. The keepers can take a beating, but like, not that much of a beating. Nothing can take that much of a beating in Warhammer, Like, if somebody puts a unit of Centurions into a keeper, it's gonna die. Like you can't just run everything forward, even though it kind of feels like it. You just have to wait. One unit at a time, maybe 2 units at a time, pushing one side, trying to make sure you're trading on points to the point where you can get to the point where you can maybe run something over. But yeah, you can't just shove everything forward.
Really trying to get multiple values out of the same thing. Like you're saying, go charge those Seekers on, deny some points, get rid of a screening unit. They did, 3 things in one turn, basically, and you're able to get some of that value with your melee army without overcommitting.
I think, yeah, that's absolutely true. The Keepers are the best unit in the detachment. They're unbelievably good. They do so much for you, right? But I think my MVP every game pretty much is the Seekers. Oh, look, I scored 11 points on secondaries turn 1 and killed a unit. Like, it's pretty good for an 80-point unit,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
if you look
are
at
you
secondaries
going
that a lot of people struggle with, right? Like engage on all fronts. Turn 1, nobody wants to see engage on all fronts turn 1, but you
I
have
love
no
it.
problem with a scout move and
Yeah.
moving up there to be like, hey, it's fine. I don't mind. Doesn't bug me at all.
I think
Yeah.
that's a key thing to remember too. I think in Warhammer in general, right? Like people are like, oh, it's 2 points for, you know, 2 points for deploying teleport homers in the middle. Those 2 points matter. Like if I don't want to give up a unit to do that, like I don't know, I would rethink that 90% of the time. You want to score those points, especially in a competitive game. Everybody's scoring 80, 90 points a game, so those 2 points are pretty important.
And if you want to play good games against good opposition, like they're not going to just give you free points. If you have the opportunity to go
Hell
out and
no.
get it, like you have to go take it. Like if I look at like we talked about it after the Wyoming or not the RTT that we did, and I played against John. I lost by 2 points, right? That is how tight good games are against good oppositions. Our game was 7 points, right? Like if you look at all of these, it's just like it's the margins are so slim, and for those players that like maybe you're going to come to RMO for the first time, and great, I can't wait for you to come to RMO, say hello to Lane, myself. If you see Frank out there, super friendly dude, say hello to all of us. But I will tell you, that place is a blender. If you go in there and you are not playing like competitively, especially at those top tables, and you go take a little walk around there, you will see some very, very tight games against some very, very good opponents, and every point matters. It'll come down to single points, single digits. So yeah, absolutely, that's great advice.
Get those points.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have. Phil, any other questions?
No, I was just looking at it. We were looking at it in the pre-show. Legions of Excess this month, so for the 2 weekends, is at 75% win rate for Legions of Excess. Obviously, I don't think that'll stay there for as we keep going after the update. But if you had a guess, where do you think Legions of Excess is going to fall once we get a little bit more data after the update?
I mean, it's the army's busted. Like don't let anyone tell you differently. The army is very, very, very good. It forgives your own mistakes and it punishes other people's mistakes hard. Like you you're fast enough that you can screw up and be like, oh, I can still get on this objective. Like, and you're fast enough that if somebody leaves something that they really don't want to die hanging out somewhere, it's gonna die. Like, it's very forgiving right now. I'd say 60. I think 60, 65 is about right, honestly. And it does need to change. Something needs to happen. I think, man, I don't know exactly what that is because I think if you nerf the points, I'm already running 11 units, right? Like if you nerf the points, some of that stuff just dies and for all demons detachments. And that's not what you want, right? Like you'd like to be able to use some of this stuff in other detachments. I think
Well, we
the
had a
keepers
thought.
are probably yeah.
If I'm Sexy Don't Shoot Me was 2 CP when you targeted a keeper and 1 CP for everything
Oh,
else,
maybe.
like obviously the value there is a little different in terms of when you target a keeper and when you target everything else because the -1 to hit is like that that feels pretty good whether you pass or fail. Being a -1 to hit, that's pretty good, and I have no problem with the we talked about it before. Like I want demons to be good. I think demons are an integral part of this game, and the more factions you have, the more fun these tournaments and games become because more armies are competitive. So I don't think it needs a lot. I think it's just like one tweak. I think it is very close, and I think the problem is it's going to beat down some people who've never played into it before, which can be tough.
I think thieves should probably be 6 inches instead of 12. I think is much more fair because you can't just 12 inches is crazy on that strat because you can. I mean, essentially, you have a unit that's totally out of danger, and you can push wounds back onto it. Like in our game, that the Death Leaper could have made it impossible for those Seekers to kill the gargoyles, but I could pass to another unit that was holding the middle objective, and I was in your deployment zone. Like 12 inches seems a little nuts on that, but
yeah, and I think we touched on it a little bit, in the GT recap with Phil, but I just do want to bring that up again. I feel like one of the keys that everybody needs to understand about playing into excess is redundancy. Whether it's shooting or melee, they can only make one thing, either -1 to hit or, don't shoot me at all. So make sure not only your targets can at least both shoot what you want to, but can shoot other things. Because depending on how your shooting phase goes, you're going to have to divvy that up. And also, if people throw out their ablative wounds during your shooting phase, don't stop shooting that until what is behind them dies that they're passing the wounds off, and then kill the thing in front of it.
Especially if it's demonettes, because they're coming back, maybe twice, like in one turn.
Yeah.
Get 6 of them back, so make sure you kill them.
Yeah.
Very good advice.
The only other things I've found in my games is just screening. You can go through walls, but you cannot go through models. Just really, if you have the trash, I had my first game against Austin. There's a little corner, on layout 1 coming around from your deployment zone. I threw trash at that keeper for 4 turns, and it wasn't able to move.
That's why I love those Seekers, dude. Gotta have the Seekers. You cannot. I don't think you can build an effective XS list without at least 1 unit of Seekers, and I don't think I would leave home without 2. So
awesome. Well, I think that's a wrap. That should be everything we have for this week. Don't forget that victory isn't given; it's forged. So keep on coming back, and we'll keep sharpening you blades that like to go out and play 40K. So
thanks, guys.
Thanks, Frank.
Talk to you soon.